Hello and welcome to Syndicate Gaming. My name is Jim, and tonight we're talking some Middle-earth strategy battle game. This is new for me on the channel. I normally cover stuff like Marvel Crisis Protocol or do random tier lists. Um, this is a new step for the channel. I want to start covering some other stuff. If you've just found the channel because of this video, please consider subscribing to let me know that you want to see more content like this. Um, but let's just jump right into it. So, there's a new edition of Middle Earth Strategy Battle Game coming soon, literally right here in the article. Um, the current edition of the game has been out for about 6 years now. There's a bunch of supplements. Um, it's a well fleshed out game. People love it. I've heard that it's the best it's ever been. I've only been playing for the last couple years or so I'm not familiar with the older editions, but from my personal experience, it's been a blast. So I'm really curious what this is going to bring, and there's some hints that I'm going to talk about, because I think I have a vast knowledge of the Lord of the Rings, lore. I probably don't have a lot compared to some people, but I know a decent amount. We're going to dive into that a little bit about what might be coming. So, let's just look at this article here. It just mentions 6 years of the current edition. There's a new edition coming, updated rules for everything in the game, new rules books. It's going to match more what you see on screen. And then finally, what else could be in the future? The War of the Rohirrim. So, this news has been out for a little bit, and I've been listening to other content creators and stuff like that, and it seems like most people don't know what this is. So I wanted to share what I found and what I know about it. So this is going to be a movie coming out in December 13th, I believe, um, about Helm Hammerhand and his family, and their journey. So this right here is Helm Hammerhand. He is an older king of Rohan. I think it's like 200 years before the War of the Ring, with Theoden and Aragorn and Éomer and all that. So he is one of the older kings of Rohan. And then right here is his daughter Hera and his sons Haleth and Hamma. I'm not sure which one is which, but they're definitely his sons. Um, Basically, in some of uh, Tolkien's writings, he wrote like 2 pages about Helm Hammerhand in this conflict, and basically the people that made the first live action movies have taken that and just run with it, right? So they're going to be launching into a full movie. It is going to be an anime, which is really interesting. I think that opens up a lot of like creative avenues that they haven't been able to use before. So that makes me pretty excited. And I'm also glad it's a movie because that's just kind of like the Lord of the Rings to me, right? It's like this epic movie, and they can definitely convey that in an anime. So hopefully it turns out well and they can make more. Um, I'm not gonna spoil like what happens because that doesn't seem super fun. You can go look it up yourself if you want to, but the primary story is going to be about Helm and his daughter Hera is who they've named her because she goes unnamed in the like source text, and they've chosen the name Hera. Well, actually, they kind of specify that it's not exactly Hera, but it's kind of like Hera, said quickly, so like Hera. Um, that's not super clear. We gotta wait for the movie to come out to know the correct pronunciation. But um, so this right here is Wolf, WULF. So he's going to be the primary antagonist of this movie. And basically, he is from Dunland. So for those who don't know, Dunland and Rohan are like ancient enemies. They both believe they should control the same territory. Like Rohan was gifted to the first king of Rohan Eorl by Gondor, and then Dunland has been like fighting them about it ever since. So Wolf is just the latest um, Dunlandine to be in conflict with Helm. So just to set the scene a little bit, Helm became king at an older age, um, and pretty much his whole life he's been fighting Dunland, and it's just getting worse and worse. And it really comes to a head during his story here with Hera and his two sons. Um, so obviously, Helm's Deep is named after him. You know, Helm's horn that Gimli blows in the movies is because of Helm Hammerhand. You know, like Theoden obviously knows his story. I think it's safe to say that Aragorn does as well because he talks Theoden into doing what Helm does. Hopefully that's not a spoiler. But yeah, I think this has a lot of potential. Um, and right here is another look at Hera or Hera. Um, she's probably going to be one of the first like shield maidens of Rohan, you know, that they talk about with Eowyn. So that's pretty cool. And her sword looks a lot like Theoden's, which is really interesting. I have no idea if it's the same sword or not, but you know, could be. And here in the background, there's some dudes wearing skull masks. So basically, why I'm covering this is because, you know, for MESBG, they've said they're covering the War of the Rohirrim. So that means new models. And I think it's really safe to say that the new starter set is going to be from this movie, right? And it's primarily Rohan versus Dunland. So everyone's assuming, and I think it's a safe bet, that the starter set is Rohan versus Dunland. So on the good side, I think it'll definitely have Helm and probably Hera. I think his two sons, Haleth and Hama, are gonna be like an extra character pack, and then maybe they'll be with like you know Rohan warriors or new like riders of Rohan could be a thing. I don't know. We haven't seen any of the other like Rohan soldiers, right? Then the other side is gonna be Dunland, and I think it'll definitely be Wolf right here. Maybe these skull dudes back here, like they could really flesh it out quite a bit, which is really cool. And I'm really curious how they're going to do the models because this is obviously an anime and they've been modeling after live action movies. So I'm very curious what these new models are going to look like. If they're going to like take them into a live action kind of thing or make them look more anime, kind of like Shatterpoint. It's going to be very interesting, but I'm personally very excited. Um, and then one of the other things we know about this movie, the War of the Rohirrim, is there's some concept art and you can see a Mumakil, which is very interesting. So I'm trying not to spoil too much, you know, as to not ruin the surprise, but like Dunland, so like in the text, Dunland allies with the Corsairs of Umbar and they attack Rohan and they specifically attack Edoras, which is the capital, right? So I think this is meant to be Edoras. The text does not mention a Mumakil, but it looks like Harad is involved, which maybe the movie will just swap the Corsairs for Harad, you know, just to make that connection to the live action movies because Harad had a much bigger presence than the Corsairs. Maybe they'll all be in it. I don't know. But I think it's going to be really cool to have like Dunland with a Mumakil and maybe some, you know, um, Haradrim versus Helm and his sons and Hera. Like I think it's just gonna be really cool. So maybe you should pick up a Mumakil now in preparation. So yeah, that's what the War of the Rohirrim is. If you didn't know, there's a lot of questions, right? But I think there's a lot of potential there, you know, for awesome models, new profiles. I'm really curious what they're going to do on the evil side because the big character is Wolf. And then there's his dad named, I think it's Rayek, will probably also be a pretty major character and get a model. But beyond that, I don't really know. Like the movie will obviously have more people, but I'm not sure. Like maybe like a new Corsair or Serpent Horde, you know, evil man would be cool. Um, I've also listened to an interview from one of the writers, and she talked about that it's more than just evil men. Like it's not just Dunland. There's also like evil creatures involved and obviously she didn't spoil anything, but like we can expect some new models, the more like fantasy side, right? It's not just going to be human versus human. She also said that elves and dwarves are not involved, so sorry to those fans. I love the elves. I personally have Lothlorien, but I'm really tempted by Helm and his daughter and two sons, so I think it's very exciting. So, what made me want to make this video is today an article came out s- going more into what's going to change in the new edition. So now we're going to get more into like the rules beyond just like the anime and models and some of the backstory. I will touch on that some more, but I wanted to talk about this because there's definitely some. Basically, I'm really hyped for this new edition, but I also have a lot of concerns. And I'm going to start with positives. I'm going to cover that in the article, and then I'm going to get into some of the negatives that could potentially happen. We don't know any of this is going to happen, but I've been playing Games Workshop games for a long time, and I've seen this happen before. So I have some, what's the right word? Some concerns, I guess. So let's just get into this. So, um, the new edition is going to focus on War of the Rohirrim. That's what we just talked about. Dunlin versus Rohan, other monsters, Mumikills. It says the entire core rules have been rewritten in an effort to streamline and modernize the game. Clearer language, consistent terminology, making the rules easier to follow have been the priorities. And new rules add narrative flavor. So I think this is overall a good thing. When you read the rule book, it's written pretty casually. Um, they don't use a lot of like technical terms, and it'll even say like this is what you should do in this situation. Like when you're prone, you should probably shield, or like they just say like this is the intent, and that's typically not how it is in a rule book. I kind of like it, but when you get into like the nitty gritty and you're playing at tournaments and somebody's trying to make a judge call, it gets kind of subjective. So this will probably be a good thing that they're modernizing and streamlining things. And they get more into what is being streamlined. Because I was really worried when they announced the new edition that they were just gonna like change the game and dumb it down, but it appears that that's not the case. So let's get into it here. So anything in the italics is from Jay, who I've never met him obviously, but I've heard a lot of things about him. He like founded the game. He's like the main force behind it, and it seems like he's a great guy that knows what he's doing. He said there were a number of things we wanted to tackle, um, but he's making the point that the new edition will still play like the game we all know and love. They're always listening, and much of the work that's gone into the new edition is from feedback from players. It's just building on the solid foundation, and they're making improvements. So that was my number one concern when they first announced it in this article. I was like, oh God, they're going to do, they're going to dumb it down like Warhammer and blah, 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 and whatever. But this seems like the core rules are the same, which is fantastic. So it seems like, the fight system will be the same, dual roles, might, will, and fate. There might be tweaks here and there, but like the overall system of like each model is its own unit that moves by itself is fantastic. I talked about that in my miniatures game tier list, that I just love that about this game, and it sounds like they're keeping it that way, which is fantastic. Um, so that is like one concern that is checked off, not to worry about anymore. So that's awesome. Um, so now he's going to talk about things they've cut that seemed unnecessary, and most of this I tend to agree with. So, for instance, the likes of the in the way chart had different values for different things you were shooting through. So, like if you shot through a tree, you had to get a 3 up, but if you shot through a fence, it was a 4 up, and then a fortification was a 5 up. And then that gets really subjective because it's like, how well built is this wall, blah, blah, blah. And now it's just 4 up, which I think is really nice actually, because you're not like debating the quality of the terrain and whatever. It's like if you're standing behind something, 4 up in the way. I think that's a really good change. But then they've entirely removed special strikes. So that was like fainting with swords, piercing strike with axes, bashing with clubs. I've seen some people are not happy about this, but I never really used it. Like I play elves, like I should have been fainting in the front line all the time. But like when I read the rule book, it's like I don't know if I can feint if I'm two-handing, and you have to like declare it whenever you fight, right? So it just kind of got weird for like minimal value. So I think it's good that it's just removed. Like and it helps to more balance the game, right? Because there were some models that could like take an axe or a sword, and it's like, how do you balance that, right? Because the axe is adding strength, but the sword is giving you a reroll to wound. So it's like they're probably just taking the axe. But anyways, I think this is a good thing that they're cutting. Because when they start cutting things, you get worried, right? But I think this is one that's okay. Greatly speed up the game and kind of get rid of those feels bads, right? Of like, oh well, I meant to faint, but you didn't actually say it. So, okay, so now we're getting into the really big stuff that I have a lot of thoughts about. So, there's a greater focus on narrative armies in match play, which is great. Like most people do match play, I think. It centers around key storylines from the movies and books, and you can recreate those scenes and armies on the tabletop. So, every profile in the game is split into a series of army lists, focusing on a particular scene, battle, or group of characters from the movies or books, with its own special rules. So basically, what this is saying is that every army is a legendary legion, which I think overall is going to be a good thing, but there's some negatives that are going to come with this. So, um, yeah, like he literally says every army list is presented in the same way as a legendary legion to play to theme. Um, Like if you like the most potent combinations, your army list will still let you do it. But basically what's happening is like it seems like the alliance matrix is gone, which has some people very upset. It has some people very happy. I personally didn't do any, kind of weird alliances, but I was thinking about buying Guai here, right? And he's like a yellow ally with everyone, so that would have sucked. Like now I don't know where he's gonna be, right? Um, So let's talk about this. So I think this is a good thing in terms of like theme, obviously, because like every army is going to be like, oh yeah, that happened in the book or the movie. Like that makes sense. So like what they're showing is like Return of the King, the three hunters with a bunch of ghosts and the King of the Dead. I think it's kind of funny they had the old model, but whatever. Um, Like, that's cool, right? Like, this lets Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas lead warriors, which they had trouble doing in the previous edition, right? Like, they could only really do it in Legendary Legions, and now it's just, like, part of the game, which is pretty cool. Um, and okay, so let me talk about Defenders of Helm's Deep, because that's what I'm most familiar with, and I think that's a good example. So in the current version of Defenders of Helm's Deep, you have to bring Theoden, and he has to be your leader, right? And then it says all your throwing spears can be used as spears. Okay, that's cool. And then a third of your army can be Lothlorien elves. So, and then from there you can bring obviously like Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas, Haldir, and then Rohan heroes like Gamling and um, Haleth and Aldorf and all that. So I think that's really cool, and I actually just played that this week. It was really fun. But my concern is in this army list, do I have to bring Theoden as my leader every game? Hopefully not, because that'll quickly get boring. It's like right now in the game, it's like, okay, it's fine because I'm doing this specific theme. Like I don't care if Theoden is always my leader, like it's okay. But if that's just like how the game always is, I would like to play Defenders of Helm's Deep without Theoden. Like what if I wanted to theme my army around like Aragorn, Gimli, Legolas, Haldir, and the elves all on the wall? Like is that something I can do? I don't know, and we're gonna have to find out. But basically what I'm saying is I hope they don't get too restrictive with these army lists. And it sounds like they're not going to be because it says there's loads to choose from, um, ample opportunity to try out your combinations and see what you can come up with. So it sounds like they're not going to mandate like leaders, which I think is the big deal to me because, you know, there's a bunch of other ones like, when you bring Return of the King, Aragorn has to be your leader. It's like, well, can I play Return of the King without Aragorn and have the King of the Dead as my leader and just bring ghosts? I don't know. We're gonna have to find out. Um, and then from there, it's kind of like definitely dumbs down on like creativity, right? Because it's like, okay, my army has to be from the movies, and I can't come up with like my own scenario. Which, obviously you can in like a casual game if you're playing with your friends or whatever. But if you go to a tournament, it's like, all right, I have to have something from the movies, and you're gonna have something from the movies, and we're gonna fight. It's not gonna be like, what if, Theoden dies at Helm's Deep and it's actually Éomer that leads the charge to Pelennor Fields. Like currently in the game, you can do that, right? But with this new system, you can't do that. Which I think is kind of a shame. Like, I think part of miniatures games are cool, like, what ifs, you know? Like, when you play Warhammer, you can do, like, what if Gilliman went to Chaos, fell to Chaos, right? And Fulgrim didn't. But that's going off topic. Um, yeah, so I'm really curious about this, right? And I think another thing I was thinking about was, like, you could have the same character do different things in different army lists, which I think is really cool. So, like, for instance, the one I thought of was Boromir. So like Boromir and the Fellowship, just in regular Fellowship, because I think there will be a regular Fellowship and a breaking of the Fellowship. I don't know that obviously, but that seems likely. Um, and then like in breaking of the Fellowship, there could be a special rule that says, Boromir taunts the enemy, right? Like they have to charge Boromir if they're in range of him. Because that's thematic. Like that is what happens in the movies. He draws enemies to him, right? So I think that's kind of cool because right now it's like, wherever I play Boromir, he's doing the same thing, right? And this kind of opens up different options, which I think is really cool. Or like Gandalf could play differently in the Fellowship versus Thorin's Company because it's a different point of time. He's doing different things, and I think that's really cool. So I'm anxious about this, but I have high hopes. And we're gonna get more into the like army construction in a little bit here. Um okay, so what's next? They've changed every single profile in the game. Maybe not drastically, but something has happened, right? Um Updated wordings to fit in with the new edition. Uh One thing they looked at specifically is fight values. So, you obviously have fight 1 through 10, but realistically, everyone is between 3 and 6, unless you have like a terrible fighter or an amazing fighter. Like, fight value caps at 10, and it's just the Balrog and Sauron, right? And then 9 is only like Gil-galad, and then once you get to 8, you have like a couple monsters. And what that means is like you have somebody like Aragorn being the same fight value as like a random elf captain, and I personally don't think that's how it should work, right? Um, so basically, people are going to be bumped around. Like an elf being fight 5, they might go to fight 6, just to make them more special. But you might have Uruk-hai go up to fight 5, right? So that's going to be interesting. It's really cool. I think, yeah, right now there's just too much like for heroes, fight 5, fight 6. And if you have fight 7, you're like epic, right? So what I really want to see is like Aragorn at fight 7. I want to see like Glorfindel at fight 8. So yeah, there's a lot they can do with this, and I think it's going to be great. Just to spice things up a little bit because it's getting pretty congested and sometimes fight gets kind of messed up, right? Especially when you have like a banner that buffs everyone's fight, it like really throws everything off. Um, all right, now they're saying they're adding a new characteristic, intelligence, um, which is kind of like courage, except it's like if a model has the wits to spot in invisible ring bearer, like because in the current edition you just do it on a courage test, and that doesn't really make sense. So I don't know what they're gonna do with this. This seems kind of odd. Um, I assume like Gandalf is gonna have like really high intelligence, like Elrond will be really high on this, but it's like, does it only come up if there's a ring bearer? Probably not. I think it's gonna be like certain scenarios, maybe a character with a high intelligence will be more likely to like read the rune or the map or something. I think that might be kind of cool, but we'll see. We obviously need to learn more about this because right now it just says spotting invisible people. So, like maybe it'll help against magic. Who knows? And then it talks about some specific thematic rules. Like Sam can use his frying pan. That's amazing. I've used Sam in the Fellowship. My buddy John plays hobbits. Like we all want to see Sam doing funny stuff with his frying pan, right? So like that's just cool. Like adding stuff like this is not a bad thing. Like Lurtz, that's the guy that kills Boromir. He can potentially shrug wounds because he gets like stabbed by Aragorn and keeps fighting. And then finally, you can have Isildur potentially wield the shards of Narsil should his father Elendil be slain. That's just so cool. Like I love stuff like that, and I'm glad they're doing stuff like this. Um, and in this too, they're saying maybe it might be later, but essentially they say that these big popular characters are going to be looked at, and that's one of my big things with the Fellowship is they each feel a little bit below the curve, which then makes the whole Fellowship feel a little bit behind. It's like, why does Gandalf only have one attack, right? Like, why does Legolas only have two attacks? It's just bizarre. So I'm glad they're looking at this kind of stuff. Like, I think those are really obvious ones. Oh, also with the Legendary Legions, characters will get different war gear for each Legendary Legion, right? Because it's like, well, they're not Legendary Legions anymore. It's just the army list. But like, if you're playing the Fellowship before they get to Rivendell, Frodo won't have the Mithril coat. But every point after that, he should have it, right? So, like, who knows how far they'll break it up? But I think there's some cool stuff they can be doing here. Um, all right, so we need to get into the unfortunate stuff here. So, with the release of the new edition, there's two supplements, Armies of the Lord of the Rings and Armies of the Hobbit. So that's the way it currently works. And I actually kind of love that because it's like if I buy this book, I'm also getting the rules to everything else. So like if I want to look up what the other player's doing, I can, right? Whereas like in Warhammer, it's like I'm not gonna buy the other player's codex just to see what they're doing, right? But in here it's like you just get it automatically in the same book, which is awesome. Um so those two books are coming out with the launch of the edition, and it's only gonna be stuff from the movies. And then everything that's not in the films will come out later in a book called Armies of Middle-earth. So, this has me kind of concerned. Like, most of the models in the game are from the movies, right? But not all of them. So, like, here, I'm gonna pull up Lothlorien because that's what I'm familiar with. That's what I have, right? So in the movies, you only see Lothlorien fight once, and that is when at the Battle of Helm's Deep, Haldir shows up with a bunch of Galadrim warriors, these guys, and they help Rohan fight against, the horde of dudes from Isengard. And that's it. like you never actually see um Galadriel fight or Celeborn. So what that means is with this new system, when the new edition launches, I'm thinking that the only way to play Lothlorien is in Defenders of Helm's Deep, because that's the only way they're shown in the films. Like obviously, well maybe not obviously, but uh like during the War of the Ring, like during the movies, there's other stuff happening, right? Like there's stuff happening at Lothlorien and Mirkwood and Erebor and everywhere, right? So like Lothlorien is being attacked by like goblins and orcs, and that's touched on in the game. Like Middle Earth strategy battle game like has models for that, right? But they're not in the film, and that just makes me feel kind of bad that when the new edition launches, I can't use most of my heroes. Like I'm only going to be able to use Haldir and a generic elf captain, right? Like I can't use Rumil or Orifin. Like Wood Elf Sentinels are going to be gone. Like spent $32 on Wood Elf Sentinels. Uh, just generic Wood Elves I won't be able to play. Guards of the Galadrim Court, Galadrim Knights, right? It's only Haldir and Galadrim Warriors. Like if I'm reading this right, because it's only what's in the films. And then it's kind of like, okay, so once the Armies of Middle Earth comes out and it's stuff that's not in the films, is there just going to be like a Lothlorien army list? Like, what is the theme, right? Because they're going after the theme, and it's probably going to be the like defense of Lothlorien. So it'll be like, Celeborn, Galadriel, all this stuff will probably be in it, but Haldir won't be in it because he's dead, right? He died at Helm's Deep. So it's like I can't play Haldir in a pure Lothlorien list anymore. And that's not like the end of the world, but it's just kind of weird, right? So, and there's a lot of things like this, like, currently Suladon is everywhere. He's the guy from the Serpent Horde. Um, this guy, he's splashed everywhere. Like, I'm not saying I want to see more Suladon, but like, he's not going to be in these first two books because he's not in the films. And even in the books, he's not mentioned by name, right? There was just a Serpent Lord at the Pelennor Fields. Maybe he is mentioned by name, but my point is like he's not going to be in the Pelennor Fields army list for evil. So where is he going to show up, or will he show up? Because then it comes into legacies of Middle Earth. So it's saying for 20 years there's been a lot of profiles and miniatures, and some of them need to go. Which this makes sense, but it kind of sucks. They'll have their own PDF, which will be available to download at the same time as armies, and it'll have rules, but they'll no longer be supported and won't be allowed at Games Workshop run events. Which that's not the end of the world because there's not a lot of Games Workshop events, and most people will probably allow them anyways. But if I had to guess, they're going to be pretty bad because that's typically how Games Workshop does legacy units. But most Middle Earth fans aren't going to care about that. They're just going to care about the theme and their army. So that might not be the end of the world. But I really want to make clear that because there seems to be some confusion in the community from what I've seen. Like, not everything that wasn't in the films is going to Legacy. Like, most of it's going to be in Armies of Middle Earth. So, like, my buddy John has a Hobbit army. Like, the hobbits fought in the books during the scouring of the Shire, right? But they weren't in the movies, so they're not going to be in these first two books. They'll be in the third book, Armies of Middle Earth. Like they're not going to Legacy. Like yeah, maybe a couple Hobbit characters will go to Legacy, but not everything. So I just want to make that super clear. Like I think the kinds of things going to Legacy is these really small niche armies. So I'm going to pull up a couple of examples here. Um like Farharad, like obviously the Mumakil's gonna stay around, but like the Mahud King, Mahud Warriors, Half Trolls, and the Camels, like it's only 4 units. They're really hard to get, they're really expensive. Like I can see this kind of thing going to legacy, right? But like people that already have this will still be able to use them because of the PDF, which I think is a good thing. Like that just is a good thing. And they're telling us now. I wish they would tell us like what is going to be legacy and what's not, because like it's possible that like Caliborn gets put in legacy. Like I can't imagine that happening, but it could happen. And I hope they would inform us what is being supported and what's not before this stuff drops, because that would be a major feels bad. Um, let's see, what else do I think is going to legacy? Yeah, Cond. So these guys are mentioned in the book, but like there's no art form or anything. So all of this is like Games Workshop design, and I think that's the kind of thing they're getting rid of, right? It's like you don't see a lot of this stuff. They're super niche. They're all in like metal or fine cast. Like this is the kind of stuff I would be worried about. So if you want it, if you want these models, go ahead and get them because I don't think they're going to be available for much longer. Um, and there's already entire factions that aren't even for sale on here, like the Wozes or the like Druidan, are just not on here. Like they're definitely going to be gone. You know, like Tom Bombadil and Goldberry, they might be moved to Legacy because they're like super troll. They're banned in most tournaments, anyways. So like stuff like this is what I'm concerned about. Um, yeah, but most things will be in Armies of Middle Earth. So I'm curious how big this book will be because I think it's reached the point in the game where like I wonder if there's more movie stuff or non-movie stuff. I guess not because there's 2 movie books and one like non-movie book. So yeah, I don't know. Um, yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. Oh, there's one more thing I wanted to touch on. When they talked about strikes, um, basically they're saying it doesn't matter what the model is armed with, which I think is awesome because like if we pull up like the Iron Hills dwarves, like there's people that have bought this box of Iron Hill dwarves, took off the Maddox and gave them sword and shield, and because that was a thing in the current edition, right? But like in the new edition, that's not going to be a thing, but it's not going to matter. So like, well, I guess this is a unique situation because they either have spears or a two-handed weapon, and I think two-handed weapons will still be a thing. So that'll be interesting. But I think it's really cool that you can model your stuff however you want, and it doesn't affect gameplay. So that's pretty sweet. All right, now let's talk about supplements. All of the current supplements in the game are no longer valid. Um, and that's including Rise of Angmar. So, I mean, this is just classic Games Workshop, right? Like all the previous books you spent money on are not valid anymore, and that drives me crazy. Um, I don't think it's as bad for Middle Earth because you only get 1, 2 books, and that should last the whole edition instead of like constant updates. So it's not as bad for this, but like anyone that thought these were sticking around, you know, were being naive or just not aware of how Games Workshop works. I guess the big surprise for people was that Rise of Angmar is going to be like almost like basically pointless because it's coming out and then the new edition launches and everyone's wondering why this is the case. Um, I think it just got delayed too long for whatever reason. Like there's rumors that like all this is happening because of like a new licensing agreement. I don't know if that's true or not. Um, but Like, this whole book is not film stuff, right? Like, none of this would be in the movies because it's stuff that happened a long time ago or is way up in the north, right? And I think the people that make the films, that license out product or the IP don't like stuff like this. So I think Games Workshop was like, "Well, we already developed it. There's already new models." Like, I have them pulled up here. Like, there's these Angmar men, King. Like, none of these guys are in the films. A lot of these guys are even, like, made up. Like, this isn't a book character. This is not a book character. I don't This guy is actually first chief of the Dunedain. I think this is a made up character. So, I think stuff like that is not gonna be happening in the future, which makes me curious for what the future supplements are gonna be, right? Because I assume they're gonna keep making supplements to sell us stuff. But they made it really clear that, if there's any kinda conflict in the films, it should get an army list, which I think is really cool, but, like, how do they now add new army lists, right? So, that'll be interesting, that's a question for the future, um, we'll have to see. But, yeah, so I think it's gonna come out so basically the movie comes out in December, right? And the new edition is all about that movie, so it can't come out before that movie is what I think. Because I think the rule book is gonna have, like, art from that movie and profiles, and it'll just have spoilers and stuff like that, so, I mean, maybe it will, I don't know, but I assume it's coming out in January because the movie comes out in December, this will all release in January, and hopefully the 3rd book, Armies of Middle-earth, like all the non-film stuff, comes out fairly quickly. It says short while later, which to GW could be anything. Um, but yeah, that's the current news and what's going on. I'd say when I first read this news, I was very pessimistic. I was pretty down on it because I was like, wow, they're limiting choice. Like, they're cutting stuff out of the game. That's not great. But I'm really excited for War of the Rohirrim. Like, I've already talked to a buddy about splitting the starter box. Like, I'd take Rohan, he'd take Dunland. Like, we're already talking about that kind of stuff, which is really fun, right? So, um, yeah, I guess that's everything I wanted to say about it. Let me know what you think. Let me know what stuff is going to be cut from the game. Let me know if you're more excited or nervous. Um, yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I hope they don't, get greedy and mess it up, is my concern. But we'll obviously have to wait and see. Um, my main thing is like, how are the generic units that aren't necessarily shown in the movies gonna be represented, right? It's like a generic force. Like, maybe that's not possible anymore, but there's more of them in the book, so they could probably get away with it with the armies of Middle-earth. Like, if you look at, like, the Lake Town Guard, like, they were obviously in the movie, but they didn't actually fight anybody. I guess they got, like, roasted by Smaug, so maybe that's enough, but yeah. Alright, well, thanks for watching, be sure to subscribe, reach out, let me know what you thought, and yeah, I am down to speculate stuff. I wanna make more MESBG content in the future, so, um, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.